I purchased this Lionel Legacy ATSF Northern number 3751 a while back, and it has less than an hour runtime on it. And a while ago, this main smoke unit stopped working, and as you see, I get the 3 blinks of death in the cab light, indicating a smoke fan motor. Now the whistle smoke works, but the main stack smoke does not work correctly. I ordered a replacement motor for less than $4. I'm going to make an attempt to replace it in this video in order to get my smokestack working again. I'm going to mention up front my disclaimer, and that is that this is an overview video of how I attempted my repair. I'm not a professional trained repair technician, and the truth of the matter is I really made this video for myself so I could refer back to it to see how I took this apart in case I had problems putting it back together. Along the way, you'll see some fumbling I did and some problems I had taking this apart. I never took this engine apart before, and I did the video live as I went through it the first time, so don't be too hard on me, and please don't write in and say you're doing it all wrong. I'm just showing this as an overview so you can see what I went through to replace the motor. The truth of the matter is, after I got done shooting the video, I did have some problems when I put it back on the track. And I ended up finding that it was better to remove all of the connectors inside and actually take the entire shell off the top of the chassis, separate it, pulling the wires out, and then reseating everything when I was done. But this video is going to show you that I just lifted the shell up and tried to make the repairs in place. Here I'm indicating the small smoke fan motor that's attached to the smoke board for the main stack up in the shell. And that white connector with the wires on it is the first thing I'm going to go after and try to disconnect. It was really loose, and I still think that's part of the problem. But anyway, sorry, my hands are going to be in the way a lot here. I was trying to take the video over my shoulder, and I was trying to work so you could see it, but at times my hands get in the way. Now I'm just fumbling around trying to look at and figure out what part comes out of there next. I determined there were 2 screws holding the smoke assembly into the top shell, so I thought I'd remove those first. Since I never did this before, I wasn't sure if anything else was holding the smoke assembly into the top of the shell, so I tried various ways and saw that it was loose, but couldn't really get a good grip on it to get it out. Eventually I figured out I could take 1 screw out underneath and remove the entire front plate on the boiler. I had to carefully maneuver it around the handrails, but eventually I got it free without damage. I was then able to reach in through the boiler and from the back end at the same time and remove the smoke assembly. And there it is. The entire thing came out free. There's the motor, the baffle, a little tube that goes over the batting underneath the smoke unit itself, and the stack. There are 2 tiny Phillips screws that are holding the motor into the baffle below. So I removed those, 1 on each side. Helps to have one of your screwdrivers magnetized for these events. I was able to carefully pull the motor with the little impeller out of the baffle below. The baffle was held onto that metal smoke box with a little plastic tube, and there's a little black impeller, plastic impeller on the bottom of the motor. Here's another view of the motor with the impeller and my replacement motor. I just wanted to give you an idea how small these really are. If you can see, I held up a pencil point or a pencil eraser near it. Really, really small motors. I'm going to make an attempt at removing the little plastic impeller. I didn't know what was holding it on, but it looked like I could just carefully get in there with a blade and pry it off. At some point when I was putting it back together, I actually used an X-Acto knife, the edge of an X-Acto blade in there to set the space. Because when I put it back together, the impeller was pushed on too far and was hitting the motor. So apparently you do want some kind of a gap in between the motor and the impeller. Now will be a good time to notice these tiny, tiny Phillips screws here. I used the smallest Phillips screwdriver I had in my set. Be very careful with them. You drop those things on the floor, you'll never find them. They hold on this little plastic black shroud on the end of the motor, which then attaches the motor to the baffle underneath it. So I just saved that part, and now I can replace my motor. I got my soldering iron heated up. I'm going to make an attempt to remove these tiny wires off of here without getting in the way of the camera. I had my soldering iron set around 700 Fahrenheit. Little touch on the tab, they popped right off. Worked really well. I'm going to pre-tin the little leads coming out of the new motor, so it'll make it easier to solder the wires on. Now let's try to solder these little dudes on here. Just a little touch to the wire and the tab. The solder melts together pretty easily. And that's it. Now we'll put this little plate back on the bottom of the motor with those super tiny screws. I won't bore you with all the tiny details here, but just be advised, do not drop these things on the carpet. They're very difficult to find. Okay, good. Now the little plastic impeller. Remember, set a thin gap with a blade or screwdriver between the plastic impeller and the fan motor. And the plastic shroud with the tube coming out of it, which goes over the impeller. And the plastic tube pushes onto the shaft on the metal box. And now the small screws that hold the motor and the shroud and the baffle together. Now I'll return the completed smoke assembly back into the shell of the locomotive. And then return the front boiler plate to its position. Now I reattach the wire coming from the locomotive up to the main smoke unit. I found this connector to be problematic and loose, so I bent the contacts a little bit and put a dab of super glue on each side. So I put her back together, put the shell on, did a reset on the locomotive, put it on the track. Let's give her a test run and see how it works. Looks like good smoke output to me. Whistle smoke still seems to be working. No more blinking lights in the cab either. Well, I hope this has been useful to someone, and thanks for watching.